David, I'd like to ask you, looking at the decline of London, how severe would you describe this decline, and who do you hold responsible for it?
Ooh. Again, I've known right. When did I first come to London? How many decades before you were born? I first stepped into this city. It would have been in. We couldn't afford to come up to the Great Exhibition of 1951. Nor the coronation of 53. I would first step here as a boy of 11. So I'm in, where am I now? In fact, I'm in 1956. There was still willow herb. There were huge areas of the city that were still bombed. There was the filth of smoke everywhere. There was still the remains of the great smokes, the great fogs, which had enveloped the city. It was still subject to, we'd only just escaped real rationing, barely 5 years. Now, in one sense, the London that we have now is inconceivably better. The transformations of building, the cleaning, the restoration, the extraordinary sense of boom, of growth around the city of London itself. So some of it, the state of the shops, what one can buy, the food shops, all of this kind of thing. In other words, what I'm doing is, in one sense, Rakib, I am conceding what is talked about of the success of the post-war society. And to some extent, it is simply unchallengeable. But what have we lost? You see, as always, historical change is a complex process. One gains and one loses. There has been, in so many ways, extraordinary material gain. Equally, of course, and remember, if we go back to that city of the 1950s, there are still huge, profoundly poor slum areas. The docks are hovering on the point of it's the last moment really when the docks show themselves in their old light is Churchill's funeral in the 1960s. There's a whole world which is dying, another one waiting to be born. And so on. But of course, it was an intensely white city, the greatest change I had never seen. Again, and this is also an interesting fact, I do not terribly often, even when they have doctorates, speak to people of a different complexion from mine. I first saw a black person, how many years later, when I went to Cambridge. So we're now in the 1960s. I simply hadn't. I knew, of course, they existed. I knew about the empire, and I had read my Kipling and so on. But it was a profoundly white society. It was much more coherent. There were huge places, there were large patches of lawlessness. This is the world of the craze, this is the world of the gangs and so on. There was, at the same time, if I think of my own little town in the north, and I also knew the industrial north, I knew the already decaying world of the cotton towns, which were always satanic mills. It's where the phrase dark satanic mills comes from. I knew all that, but there was intense social discipline. I remember my council estate, because I was born on one, and it was run by women. These extraordinary women. I don't know whether you remember Ina Sharples in EastEnders, there with the huge heaved up bosoms, the turbans, literally exactly that. And any lad, because of course it's 99% of the time, a lad who stepped out of line was cuffed, and cuffed hard, and took it. All of that's gone. We've got something different. We've got London that was in one sense cosmopolitan. There was still an empire. The monarch had ceased to be Emperor of India in the 40s, but there was still emphatically an empire. I was taught that between a quarter and a third of the globe still being coloured pink. Inexplicably, it always was. There was still an empire, but London, too, was profoundly a monocultural city. All that's gone. So what we have then is, again, this extraordinary contrast, isn't it, between staggering affluence. If you look at the areas in the article that I've been reading of yours, if you look at the areas where knife crime is most prone, the most flagrant cases of knife crime involving robbery of things like Rolexes, they're the richest areas of London. They're large chunks of Westminster. There are St James's. There's the area around Harrods. There's the area of Knightsbridge. Here, of course, there's a sense of one of the richest cities in the world. The things in the shops are staggering. But of course, there is this extraordinary juxtaposition, isn't there, which is very characteristic of the city, of the very rich and the poor, of the law-abiding and the and the criminal, all turfed up together and with remarkably little in and between them. Because you see, what has happened to us, I think, and so I'm not pointing particular blame at individuals. What I'm saying is we were a very different kind of society. If you are homogenous, if there are powerful social restraints. In other words, people restrain themselves, or groups restrain them. If there's a powerful sense of a history of self-governance, remember, why don't we have an armed police force? Why don't we have an armed police force?
I think ultimately we have that classic model of policing by consent.
Yes, but why do we, sorry, Rakib, why do we have that model?
Well, I think that ultimately, firstly, many police officers supported that model largely because I'd consider to be, back in the day, we were a higher trust, civilized
We were a
society.
high, but it's so this term higher trust is a modern invention. Why? Who is right? Forgive me interrogating, but it's really interesting that somebody as informed and as active in this area isn't giving me instant answers. Why? Who invents policing by consent? Who actually introduces the very idea of the citizen policeman? Why do our police not look like the army, though are increasingly doing so? Why traditionally did they wear a funny helmet? Why were they called constables?
Well, I think that we have that policing by consent. It was that Peel-like model.
It's Peel, right? It's Sir Robert Peel. It's the 1830s. In other words, this is, remember, one of the great moments of reform, parliamentary reform, and the whole basis of that idea of Parliament was self-government. That Parliament was just the pinnacle of a whole structure of what one of the great authorities, one of those who's written most movingly about all of this, that's to say Edmund Burke, talks about the little platoons.